In this episode, we talk about a new party making its mark in Rajasthan assembly elections. We also give you a quick update on the Israel-Hamas war. But first, we talk about the Nobel Prize in Economics. Hi, I'm Utsa Sarmin and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. Earlier this month, Claudia Goldin, professor of economics at Harvard University, won the Nobel Prize in Economics for her extensive research on the wage gap and women's involvement in the labor market. And according to Professor Farzana Afridi, Goldin's win is significant for two main reasons.
This is the first time that a woman economist has solely won the Nobel Prize. The second reason why this is very critical and important because it is bringing a spotlight onto the issue of women's labor force participation, women's experiences in the labor market. So it brings a gender lens to understanding labor market participation as well as occupational choices that are made by women, whereas there has been a lot of work looking at labor markets in general, it has lacked the lens of a woman's perspective.
Farzana is a professor of economics at the Indian Statistical Institute and a visiting professor at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto. And in this segment, my colleague Rahel Philipose speaks to her about the significance of Goldin's work and its relevance for a country like India.
So Farzana, Goldin was mostly concerned with women's participation in the labor market, but what exactly was the focus of her research over the years?
So the early work that Claudia started with was to understand what are the factors that determine women's participation in the labor force. So what I mean by participation is the decision to enter the labor market itself. So what factors determine women's engagement or decision to enter the labor market in the sense of, what is their educational attainment, whether they are married, unmarried, whether they have children, and so on and so forth, how they decide whether women make the decision to work or not work. And the next thing that she was looking at is, and more recently has been focusing on, is to understand the factors that affect women's occupational choice. So what we mean by that is, let's say, I've decided as a woman, given my educational qualification and other characteristics, my marital status, whether I have children or I don't have, what kinds of occupation am I going to go into? How many hours of work am I going to put into the work that I am doing? And those have implications for the gender pay gap that we observe in a macro setting. So both of these issues she has tried to understand in a historical context.
Right. And what's particularly impressive is that Goldin was looking at this massive amount of data, around 200 years worth of it. So based on that, what does she say about how female employment evolved, both over time and across geographies?
So traditionally, people thought that there is a direct relationship between countries' GDP per capita. So as countries get richer or as educational attainment increases, we should see an increase in women's labor force participation. So that is what we would call in economics a linear relationship. What she found out by looking at data both across countries as well as data within the US over time was that that was not true. There is actually a U-shaped relationship between GDP per capita and women's labor force participation. So what do we mean by U-shape? It means basically that those countries which are poor will have high labor force participation of women, as well as countries which are rich, they will also have high women's labor force participation. So it is countries which fall in the middle income level, they will have low participation of women in the labor market. So that gives you that U shape. So if you think in the context of a country, within a country, countries grow or change structurally from being poor to becoming rich, then as a country becomes richer, First, we will see a decline in the women's labor force participation. It will fall to some low level, minimum level. And then as incomes increase beyond the middle income GDP level, you will see an increase in women's labor force participation.
Right, but why is that? Why doesn't women's participation increase as an economy grows?
Now, there are two reasons why this happens. One is, on the one side, when you have a poor country and as the country is progressing towards higher income levels, there are cultural and social norms which hold women back within the homes. And that is, when there's a structural change happening, as GDP per capita is increasing, countries are also moving from more agriculture to manufacturing to the services sector. So what happens is that as that structure of the economy is changing, because of which the economy is growing and becoming richer, there is, along with that, you're sort of looking at a scenario where there is stigma attached to women working in factories, women doing manual work, because a lot of opportunities open up for men in the manufacturing sector. And women typically are not allowed to go out of the homes and work because of the male attitude that if I can't provide for my family, somehow, it reflects poorly on me. But as the structural change deepens and you have a shift happening from the manufacturing to the formal services sector, then jobs which are higher status, in the sense of, they're available in the service sector, they're also higher earning jobs where women would be doing secretarial work, office, desk jobs. Those become available to women, while at the same time, women's educational attainment increases. And therefore, the social cost, the stigma that is attached to women working becomes weaker. And then women start participating in the labor force, in the labor market more in these types of service sector jobs. And therefore, the women's labor force participation increases as the economy transitions and becomes richer from manufacturing further to the services sector.
Right. And when she talks about the transition and the U-shaped curve, Goldin emphasizes the role that marriage and the contraceptive pill played in women's labor force participation. Can you explain what Goldin meant by that?
So in the 1960s, so this is after a lot of that structural transformation has already happened in the 60s or so in the US, where, there's a shift towards the services sector and women are coming out and working. But there was still this constraint that women were facing, which was not due to the social stigma attached, but due to the fact that once they gave birth to children, they had to either drop out of the labor market, or when they came back to the labor market, they lost a lot of years being out, which meant that, it's of course a struggle to get back and to get back to the same level of earnings and in your profession as at the time you had left. So she talks about this technology, the medical technology of the pill, which allowed women to control the timing of the childbirth, which according to her was critical because then women could delay childbirth, which means that they could invest in careers which were required longer gestation periods. So what are those kinds of careers? They would be medical profession, legal professions, business, MBAs, and so on and so forth, which require investments in terms of time. You need to spend more time in getting these professional degrees, which was earlier difficult for women because the childbirth wasn't in their control, and then they would have to drop out of school even before they started the profession. So this was critical because of this new technology. It enabled women control over their bodies, over the timing of birth, allowed them to delay birth. And so she shows data over this period starting in the 1960s where the proportion of women who entered the medical profession, legal profession, where the pay is also higher, increased dramatically during the 1960s and 70s as a result of this new technology.
So a lot of our work that we've discussed so far seems to be focused on organized work. But what about the unorganized sector or gig work? How does gender play a role there?
Yes, that's a really good question. Her more recent work, especially when she is talking about the persistence of the gender pay gap within occupation, she talks about how it is important not to regulate pay as a solution to reducing the gender pay gap, but actually changing the nature of work itself. And that's precisely where, the platform economy and the digital economy comes into play, where according to her, at least her hypothesis is that if we are able to do more of work in the digital space from home, which allows more flexibility in work hours, which is where we have shifted post-pandemic. Like if you look at the West right now, there's a lot of resistance still of workers to come back to regular work hours physically to the workspace. A lot of work is still happening from home. And so according to her, this is actually potentially a boon for women. And this is something that we need to study further down the line, just in the same way that she studied the effect of the birth control pill. Is this really going to transform into, reducing the gender pay gap from a Western perspective, which is, sort of more important probably, but from the perspective of developing countries like India, whether it is going to bring more women into the labor force. But what we should worry about here is that if we care only about women getting onto the labor market and being productive, probably this new technology has the potential to do that. But in an Indian context where a lot of our workforce is still blue collar and that we do not sort of grant them a formal status, this kind of work, the gender pay gap is going to remain. And if you see more women on platforms relative to men, it doesn't mean that the gender pay gap is going to disappear. It might actually exacerbate.
And Farzana, could you tell us how Goldin's hypothesis applies in a country like India?
The transformation that we saw that she documents in the US in women's labor force participation happened very quickly in about 30 to 40 years, as I pointed out, going from 1970s to in about 40 years or half a century. We have seen a massive transformation in terms of women's labor force participation in the US. So the question really is, where are we relative to what has historically happened in the West, and where are we getting? And I think what is the most relevant is that, as I pointed out to you earlier, when we think of that U-shaped relationship and the fact that there has been actually a decline in women's labor force participation in India in the last few decades, and we are close to something like 25 to 30% only of women active in the labor market. What is it that we need to do in order to get, this demographic dividend that we talk about, that, we are going to lose if 50% of a potential workforce is not employed? And what has been very disappointing is that the gender gap in education attainment in India has declined dramatically in the last few decades. And yet we don't see these women participating in the labor market, unlike, what we would have expected from the theory that Goldin has put forth. And the reason that it is, to me at least, seems quite obvious is that, when you go back to her theory, she points out that this increase in educational attainment has to happen simultaneously with better work opportunities becoming available for women. Unfortunately, what has happened in our country is that we have moved from agriculture to services, but the majority of it is in the informal services sector. So of the women who are currently employed and working, in a formal sense, in the sense of the definition that we have of employment, they are in the informal sector. 90%. By some estimates, of women who work are in the informal sector in India.
Right. So from a policy perspective, how can we increase women's participation in the labor force in India?
So what we need here is a very concentrated effort from both the government and the private sector to create opportunities for women, number one, in the manufacturing sector, which is where the bulk of the level of education of women being post-secondary lies. India has sort of skipped that structural transformation in terms of being a manufacturing powerhouse, for instance, as Bangladesh has shown with the garment sector, or China has been. And so we need to create those opportunities, but at the same time, we need to provide incentives for more of this manufacturing sector growing in the country. We need formalization of work. We need decent work with decent work and pay. So we need a focus on industrial policy, economic policies, which put women at the center of it. Because otherwise, we have a lot of women who might be gaining education but are not being able to utilize it productively. And so we might be stuck at very low levels of women's economic participation and not be able to transition to where the Western economies have, as Goldin has shown in her, the massive amount of data and work that she's put together for the US.
And next we talk about Rajasthan. The state, which will hold elections early next month, has traditionally been dominated by two national parties, the BJP and the Congress. However, this time a new party has entered the election race, the Bharat Adivasi Party or BAP. The leaders of this party have alleged that the BJP and the Congress have neglected the issues of the tribal population in the state for years, and hence there was a need to establish a party with a specific focus on this community. To learn more about the party and its potential impact on the Congress and the BJP, we speak to the Indian Express's Deep Mukherjee. Deep, tell us, how has the tribal population in the state traditionally voted in Rajasthan?
Yeah, so the tribal population in Rajasthan, traditionally they were voters of Congress. Like the Meena community would traditionally vote for the Congress. But in recent years, the BJP has also made inroads in the tribal vote bank. And it is not only a phenomenon of the past few years. Like BJP has leaders such as Kirodi Lal Meena, who is considered one of the, if not the tallest tribal leader in Rajasthan, a multiple time MLA and MP. He's presently the Rajya Sabha MP, also from Rajasthan. So we have to understand the tribal population is more than 13% in Rajasthan, especially in southern Rajasthan and in eastern Rajasthan. The tribal population and the tribal vote is a deciding factor in several constituencies. So multiple political parties are presently voting the tribal votes.
Right, and we understand that a rupture took place in 2018 when the Bharatiya Tribal Party, which is a party from Gujarat, contested the assembly polls. Can you tell us why the state's tribal population felt they needed a new party?
Yes, so for a long time, there weren't any other options other than the Congress and the BJP. And back in 2018, a large chunk of the tribal population was not satisfied with the BJP government at that time, the Vasundhara Raje government. And at the same time, they were wary of the Congress because they felt that despite subsequent governments of Congress and BJP in power in the state, their issues were not addressed. Issues related to employment, reservation in tribal dominated areas, issues related to forest and land rights. So at this point of time, there were several tribal young leaders who were working in under various social platforms, working with the community, working for the community. So they felt that there was a need to participate in electoral politics. And at that time, they thought that the Bharatiya Tribal Party of Chotu Bhai Vasava, which has originated from Gujarat, was such a platform that could serve their interests. So they contested the elections on a BTP ticket. And surprisingly, BTP shocked both the Congress and BJP by winning 2 seats in southern Rajasthan.
Right, but Deep, now most leaders and cadres of the BTP have established a new party, the Bharat Adivasi Party. So could you tell us why they broke away from the BTP?
Yes, so this year they have floated a new outfit called the Bharat Adivasi Party, BAP, and I spoke with the leaders of the BAP. So presently the 2 incumbent MLAs who won the 2018 elections on BTP tickets have also joined the party along with a substantial chunk of the cadre of the BTP, and they have severed ties with the BTP, and BAP is now the dominant force in southern Rajasthan when it comes to all tribal party. So what they are saying is that they realize that the BTP leadership in Gujarat and also some people who were running the party here were not concerned about the local people's wishes. And one of the major flashpoints were in 2021 when the Dharyavad by-election was being held in Pratapgarh district. So the BTP gave its ticket to a candidate to whom most of its leaders were opposed to. As a result, many BTP leaders, they instead chose to support an independent candidate, and the independent candidate ended up finishing second in the elections ahead of both the BJP, the Congress and the BTP candidate. So this incident kind of showed to the tribal population and the incumbent BTP MLAs also that the popular tribal support was not with the official designated candidate of the BTP, and they felt the need to have their own outfit created in Rajasthan instead of relying on a party which has its roots in Gujarat. And that is how BAP has been formed this year.
And what would you say is BAP's main electoral agenda going into this election?
Yeah, so the main electoral agenda of the BAP, according to its leaders, is that to ensuring more stakeholdership of tribals and also to address issues of reservation and demand for a separate state for Bhils. This is one demand that has been doing the rounds for several years. What these tribal leaders are saying that because districts such as Udaipur, Dungarpur, Banswara, Pratapgarh, they have high tribal population, that a separate state for the Bhil community, which is an ST community, should be created. And that is one of the demands. And they are also saying that the larger parties like the Congress and the BJP are not really working for the interest of tribals, and they want to grab that space, and they want to ensure that tribal youth or the tribal population, they are getting the equitable distribution of resources, of jobs, of rights in these areas.
Right, and how do we expect BAP to impact Rajasthan's current political scene?
Yes. So while it is true that the BAP is a relatively new outfit, but in the last elections, we saw that the BTP not only won 2 MLAs, but it also finished up as runner-up in some constituencies. And even in the 2019 MP elections, the BTP candidate got more than 250,000 votes, so which shows that the party has substantial support in that area. Now, whether this support would translate into votes, we would know that like after the elections, but at the moment it is very much evident that the BAP can actually spoil the electoral arithmetic of for the both the Congress and the BJP by cutting away votes and also winning seats on its own. The BAP has said that they are eyeing 17 seats in southern Rajasthan, hoping to contest from there. And with the entry of BAP, like now it is a three-way contest, not a two-way of the Congress and BJP.
And Deep, do we know how the national parties, Congress and BJP, are viewing BAP's entry into the scene?
Well, since the beginning, BJP has been dismissive of the tribal parties such as BTP and BAP. At times, they have even accused them of indulging in quote-unquote anti-national activities, an allegation which has been vehemently denied by these parties by saying that they are only talking about the rights of tribals and that is why they are being targeted by the BJP. And as for the Congress, like the Congress has been in talks with the BAP, like Chief Minister Ashok Gehlot has also said that there are talks of an alliance with the BAP, but it is still unclear whether the alliance will come through because the Congress has already declared some tickets in the tribal areas and from seats where the BAP was keen to contest or would have allied with the Congress if their candidates were given these were fielded from these seats. So it is yet unclear whether the Congress will enter into an alliance with the BAP, but it is clear that in this election the BAP will be contesting several seats and the outcome could be surprising.
And in the end, we give you a quick update on the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas. As many of you may be aware, Israel has been engaged in a war with Hamas since the 7th of October, when the militant group launched an unprecedented attack on Israel. In response, Israel retaliated with airstrikes on the Gaza Strip. Now, 2 weeks after the surprise Hamas attack, Israel's military said its ground forces had mounted limited raids into the Gaza Strip and said their airstrikes were focusing on sites where Palestinian militants were assembling to attack any wider Israeli invasion. And on Sunday, Hamas said that its fighters had engaged what it described as an armored force infiltrating a southern area of Gaza and had destroyed some Israeli military equipment. Meanwhile, Israel's chief military spokesperson, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, said that 222 people had been taken as hostage by Hamas when they raided southern Israel on the 7th of October. And in the last 2 weeks, over 4,600 people in Gaza lost their lives and over 14,000 people have been injured, while on the other side, 1,400 Israelis were killed. And to aid Gaza, Turkey had sent 2 cargo planes to Egypt carrying medical equipment and supplies there. Other countries like the US and India had also sent humanitarian aid to Gaza via Egypt. Arindam Bakshi, the official spokesperson of the Ministry of External Affairs, posted on the social media platform X that, quote, India sends humanitarian aid to the people of Palestine. An IAF C-17 flight carrying nearly 6.5 tons of medical aid and 32 tons of disaster relief material for the people of Palestine departs for El Arish Airport in Egypt. The material includes essential life-saving medicines, surgical items, tents, sleeping bags, tarpaulins, sanitary utilities, water purification tablets, among other necessary items. Unquote. At the moment, Indian Express's Shubhajit Roy is on the ground in Israel reporting on the crisis. You can read his reportage in the newspaper or at indianexpress.com. You are listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. It was written and produced by me, Utsa, Sarmin, Rahel, Philipose and Shashank Bhargava. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone who you think will like it and share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Podcast and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.